Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back in our episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts in the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. First, we have, I guess it's just different, with the R in different, in parentheses and capitalized, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the Political Compass meme subreddit, and it's a crying Wojak of all of the alt-right colors, and it says that he's next to Graham Plattner. It says that dirty neo-Nazi rapist needs to drop out of the Senate race, and then he's next to, I think, Max Miller, who just got accused, I think, of pouring hot water on his wife or something, and then he says, wow, heckin' wholesome trad chad wife beater, hope he wins his race. And yeah, personally, I guess I would agree with that. You know, the only standards most people have when it comes to politics are doubled. When their team does something, you know, it's completely fine, but when the other team does something, it's the worst thing ever. And it just goes to show you, you know, no one has, you know, a lot of people don't really have any principles. They just only care about what letter people has next to their name. And it just goes to show you, when you only care about what letter is next to someone's name rather than anything else, you know, even if they're alive or dead, you know, I know in some elections people are going to vote for the dead guy if he has the right letter next to his name. And it just goes to show you that it's not a very good way to go through life, just only caring about letter next to the name rather than anything else. But that's sadly how a lot of people do it, and I don't personally care for it, but yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have full reserve banking article posted by MisesLover69, and that's a looks like a quite a wall of text. I don't think I'm going to read all of it, but yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is if people want to set up reserve banks, they should be able to, but I personally don't really care for them. You know, they tend to be over-centralized and end up really controlling the economy, just like the Federal Reserve in the United States. And I think that libertarian position is, you know, you shouldn't do it, you know, because it's going to be over-centralizing and overly controlling of the centralized economy. But ultimately, it comes down to what each individual is willing to justify. You know, if those in positions of power want to set up a reserve bank or a fractional reserve bank, I think they call it, you know, they have every ability to do so. And if you don't like it, you know, ultimately there's really nothing you can do about it, because, you know, it's state backed, and when something's state backed, you know, there's really nothing you can do about it, even if you don't like, even if you think it's the worst thing ever. Next we have, study confirms that free market capitalism causes prosperity, but from link.springer.com, posted by Socialist or Morons. And yeah, personally, and they added follow the science. And I personally, I would say, I would kind of agree with that. You know, if a truly free market, I think, really is probably the best thing when it comes to libertarian perspective. But with that being said, you know, science has just become a tool for people to push their agendas. Normally, it's from a more progressive standpoint, but this is from a more libertarian/conservative standpoint, I would say. But regardless, you know, I think, you know, if you want to believe whatever science says, you should be able to, but you shouldn't force other people to believe that if they don't want to. And yeah, personally, it's why I think a lot of people don't really take the concept of science seriously anymore. They just see it as a tool to push an agenda, which in many ways I think it pretty much has become. You know, science is always questioning stuff. Well, in these days, you know, people say, you know, people just say science is study shows what I believe. Anyone who thinks otherwise is a fascist chud. And you know, that's not very much what science is. You know, studies should always be questioned. Just because the study says something one time doesn't mean it's going to say it every time. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump DOJ now 0 for 20 after judge dismisses Colorado voter roll lawsuit with prejudice, posted by Swamp Yankee Dan, and that's crossed from the law subreddit, and it's a story article from democracydocket.com. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position here is that, you know, if Trump's DOJ is 0 for 20, you know, Reddit should be should probably like that. But it's interesting. Reddit. It's like I think I always remember one of the core tenets of fascism is that the enemy is both strong and weak. So Reddit will cite this and say, "Oh, see, Trump's administration is weak as hell. It's losing all its court cases." But then they'll simultaneously say Trump's literally stronger than Hitler. We are living under fascism, and it just goes to show you that these people they'll say whatever suits their narrative. When it comes to Trump, he's simultaneously a weak, senile retirement home patient who constantly soils his diapers, while also being somehow worse and more competent than Hitler when it comes to getting all his agenda done. And it just goes to show people are going to follow whatever the narrative is. These people, will simultaneously post that Trump's strong. Other parties do this too. I would say, the Republicans, Libertarians, Greens, etc., all do kind of the enemy is strong and weak as well. But Reddit, of course, always does it more from the Democrat perspective. Next, we have the FBI is reportedly exploring the use of AI to help identify potential threats before crimes are committed, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a cross post from the Gen AI for All subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately the FBI is in a position where it can justify pretty much doing whatever it wants to, and all of the time there's nothing you can do about it. The libertarian perspective is we gotta abolish the FBI and pretty much all the other alphabet agencies. But sadly, I don't know how realistic that's going to be, especially because, the government only ever seems to grow rather than shrink, and they only add more bullshit agencies as time goes on. Next, we have Cornyn says there's nothing we could do to rein in Trump, defends Blanche Steele, posted by Donald Key, and that's crosspost from the LOL subreddit. And yeah, personally, I just go to show you that the people are always going to defer to what the president says, especially those in his own party. Reddit's of course going to be critical of this because the Republicans are saying there's nothing we can do to rein in Trump, but they didn't care for reining in any of their president, the Democratic president. So it just goes to show you, we need to really end the cult of the presidency. And in many ways, Trump isn't even the worst example of you can't rein him in. Just look at Lincoln and FDR, for example. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have analysis of 97,220 people across 66 countries tested 200 plus societal factors and found that communitarian path to happiness, societies where people are enabled to boost each other's happiness, significantly outperforms the individualistic take care of your own happiness approach, posted by Maddie O'Clock, and that's a cross-post from the Science subreddit, and that's a story from scipost.org. And personally, I think the libertarian perspective is people want to be communitarians and practice voluntary reflectivism. I think that they should be able to, but I think the libertarian perspective is it should come out down to each individual of what they want to practice. They want to be more collectivist or voluntary collectivist. I think they should be able to. If they want to be pure individuals, I think they should be able to. I think, just ultimately each person can justify what they want to, and if they want to think that their system's going to lead to the most happiness, they should be able to. As I said earlier, this is a science study. Just because one science study says something doesn't mean everyone studies can say the same thing. So yeah, ultimately I think it comes down to allowing for as much individual choice as possible is going to lead to the most happiness rather than pure communitarian or individualistic scenarios. Next we have the rally behind a new political movement that challenges U.S. political leadership, one that is America first, not Israel, yes, a third party, posted by Apollo Delphi, and that's a cross-post from the Live News 24H subreddit, and that's a YouTube video from, let's see, it's an ad, I gotta wait for the ad to play, and then, another ad, and then, I think it's the Young Turks, yeah, it's from the Young Turks, are Tucker Carlson and Joe Kent planning a third-party run. Joe Kent tells us. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, I don't know if I necessarily agree with everything Tucker Carlson and Joe Kent say, but, if they do run third-party and are sufficiently popular, I might vote for them just to get out the duopoly. Their third party might screw us over in other ways, but at the very least, it would be a different party than the ones that have consistently been in power since the middle of the 19th century. Because I'm tired of these two parties. If it can't be the Libertarian Party, at least get another party in there, and Tucker's party could be that party. Especially since if both major parties run Zionist, a third party anti-Zionist candidate could take votes from could win on that position. Since both major parties are taking votes from the Zionists, maybe the anti-Zionist position will end up winning when it comes to third party. It's kind of I don't know how realistic it is, but hopefully it will happen. Someday that a third party will triumph in the presidential election. I don't know how when it's going to happen, but I think one day it will happen, or the whole system will collapse. Either way, the uniparty won't last forever, and that's very much, I think libertarians should take solace in that. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have: cops use flock to track a man across state lines to create pretext to search his car for weed. The vehicle travels to Michigan frequently, which is a known source state for marijuana, as it's illegal there. A probable cause justification reads, posted by Donald Key, and that's crossed from the technology subreddit. And that's from 404media.co. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but just go show you the state can justify doing pretty much whatever it wants to, for any reason it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. I personally think if you want to do marijuana, or whatever you want to do marijuana, you should be able to, but ultimately the cops might think differently, and they have the force of the state to justify doing whatever they feel like. Even if marijuana is legal, they still can arrest you for it if they feel like it, because ultimately, they can arrest you for whatever they feel like, since they have the monopoly of the legal use of force on their side. Next we have, why has this not been done? Posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's cross-post from the Legal News subreddit. Experts say blue states can stop paying federal taxes. There's precedent from open.substack.com. And that's, I personally think the libertarian position is, if people want to pay federal taxes, they should be able to, but they shouldn't be forced to do so. Same with state and local government taxes. Ultimately, it should come down to what people want to justify. And if people don't want to justify paying federal taxes, they shouldn't be forced to do so. If the blue state governments don't want to pay federal taxes right now, I think that's fine. And if the red state governments don't want to pay federal taxes when a Democrat president's in power, I think that's fine. Ultimately, it comes down to whatever people want to justify at any given moment. Next we have, Republicans really own the libs with this one, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's crosses from the Midas Touch subreddit. And that's it looks like a post from the Como County Republican Party. I think looks like they're in Texas. And it says, DSA, Democratic Socialist America. The DSA's mission is to replace capitalism with democratic socialism by shifting economic and political power from corporations and wealthy owners to workers and the public. Is this what you want for America? And yeah, I personally think the libertarian position is if people want to have the economic and political power be in the corporations, wealthy owners should be able to. If they want to be able with workers and the public, they should be able to. Ultimately, we should have a decentralized system where everyone, where the political power and economic power rests with whoever feels like it. Ultimately, economic and political power ultimately can be subjective a lot of times rather than objective. And I think, it comes down to what each individual wants to see as who wields the power. And if they want to justify having it be with the corporations and the wealthy owners, they should be able to. If they want to have it with the workers and the public, they should be able to. But it ultimately comes down to what each individual wants to see as the means of who they want to give power to. Personally, I think I don't think you should be giving power to anyone without consenting to it. And I think that's very much a libertarian position. Next we have, the real extremism problem is on the right, not the left, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the No Shit Sherlock subreddit, for instance, an article from Current Affairs. And yeah, personally, I think both parties have kind of an extremism problem. They'll be fine with using their force as long as it suits their narratives. It's why Reddit, which is pretty much completely astroturfed by the left, will say, oh, the political violence among the left right-wing militia groups like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers is the worst thing ever, but then their side does it when it comes to their militia movement, when it comes to stuff like Antifa, and it just goes to show you that, and then they always say, kind of justify it. They'll say, if you're against Antifa, you're for fascism, because Antifa means anti-fascist, and just go show you, just because people name something, doesn't mean it's necessarily true. Look at the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, or the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, or North Korea, and they'll say, oh, it's just because something's named like something doesn't necessarily make it true, but then they'll say, well, it's in the name when it comes to Antifa, and they'll always bully you with that. So ultimately, I think the real problem isn't really extremism here, it's more people being unwilling to question anything their team does. Next we have metal fabrication worker handling 700 degrees Celsius metal plus metal safety on vacation, and that's cross was John Higgy Dan. That's cross was from the Next Viking Level subreddit. And yeah, I personally think that's cool. I don't know whether it was in the seriously of libertarianism or politics, but I think that looks pretty cool. Next we have, there's nothing we could do to rein in Trump, GOP senator says, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's a cross post from the politics subreddit. It's an article from Rolling Stone. And yeah, personally, I think, ultimately the president's in a position of executive power, so, if this party doesn't think they can enforce anything on him, ultimately that's on them. But just go to show you that Reddit, if this was the same headline saying there's nothing, back in a few years ago, it was the Democrat senator saying there's nothing we could do to rein in Biden, Reddit would say, oh, that's completely fine, Biden should be allowed to do whatever he wants to, but since it's the orange man, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever. Next we have, a woman made a joke in a private Snapchat message. Snapchat's AI reported it to the FBI. She was arrested for any human she sent it to ever reported her, posted by Stunning Performance, and that scroll was from the Digital Privacy subreddit. And they had to read the body text in the original post. And it says, I'll do that. It says, 22-year-old student teacher in Illinois sent a private Snapchat message to her boyfriend and two roommates. A student had walked up to her laptop and deleted her lesson plan mid-class. Frustrated, she texted him like, should I shoot him with a gun emoji, venting. 4 people private group chat. An hour later, police walked into her school and arrested her. Here's what happened in between. And they had some more sentences, I guess. But that seems like a good summary. And yeah, it just goes to show you that they can really arrest you for whatever it wants to. It doesn't even have to be a public message. It can be in a private group chat. And ultimately, I don't really care for that, but it just goes to show you that, you should always be careful of what you post online. The state might come after you for any reason, even if it's something simple, something like saying, I don't really like to eat tacos. They may justify coming after you for that, because they might say, oh, especially if a woke Democrat's powers, they'll say, oh, it's a racist microaggression. And yeah, it just goes to show you, the state is ultimately in a position of power. They can arrest you for whatever they feel like, even if, it's something done sarcastically or just jokingly. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. So I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.